Welcome back to the panic room. I've escaped from my lockdown into this panic room for 8 to 10 minutes of, well, I wouldn't say panic, of reasoned, calm discussion, not light, not trivial, very, very serious. Well, it would be if I was here on my own, but I have a colleague with me, Steve. Steve, what are we going to talk about today?
What are we going to talk about today? Well, I thought we didn't talk about death enough yesterday, so we're going to talk about death a bit more. And I also thought we could talk about running a bit more, because runners never talk about running enough, but you said no. So we're actually going to mine down into the topic of death that we touched on yesterday.
And have you been reading anything brilliant recently? Not have you been writing anything brilliant, because we know that's always true, but have you been reading anything brilliant?
Why, I'm glad you asked. Yes, there's a great article by a Christian writer called Carl Trueman, and he's called it, this article, Deaths Delayed. And he's contrasted it with the idea that we'll do anything to see lives saved in the coronavirus, but he's saying it's actually just about deaths delayed. And he writes this, let me read these words to you. Okay. We have clearly become accustomed to remarkably comfortable lives. How else do we explain fights in supermarkets over toilet paper? Make no mistake, I regard bathroom tissue as a most wonderful invention of greater importance than any cell phone or coffee machine. I wouldn't agree with them on that. But it's hardly one of life's absolute essentials. And I've often wondered about the significance of saving lives. Delaying deaths, while culturally tasteless, is technically more accurate. We are born to die. Death is inevitable, which is why each of us finds it so terrifying. Happy Friday, Dave. What do you think of that?
I think it's brilliant. And I think actually, paradoxically, I think when we are aware of our own mortality, it enables us to enjoy life more. And I know that seems strange, but when we are not aware of our own mortality, I think deep down we are aware of it. And so we seek continuing to hide from it. So you and I have both had similar experiences, but we've both had very near-death experiences. And I can tell you this, that having become acutely conscious of death and come very close to it and become acutely aware of my own mortality, that every day was a precious day, that actually has enabled me to enjoy life more. Is that similar to your experience?
That's exactly similar to my experience. And my brother did say to me that after I'd recovered from my illness, he said, you seem to live life a bit more purposefully. And that's partly because I was struck by death itself and the reality of it. And look, I'm going to show you a picture of, a picture that I think sums up how we should think about death, perhaps in a way that makes us keep doing things better and thinking about life. There's a picture of me. No. There's a picture of St. Jerome. And he doesn't have Wilson on his desk. He's got a skull. He looks a bit fatter than I do, but his beard is nowhere near as impressive. And that's St. Jerome. And he's got a picture of a skull on his desk as he writes. And the reason the people who did theology and wrote great books had skulls on their desks was simply to remind them of the inevitability of death, that it would drive them on, that it would always be there on their desk. Do you have a skull on your desk, Dave?
No, I have a picture of you, which not that much different. I don't have a skull, but actually I do have reminders. You know, I listen to Leonard Cohen, I read poetry, but again, I think the Bible reminds you. I think it's interesting in the current situation in which we find ourselves that people have been forced to reflect on death. You know, you hear this phrase, I wish I could get back to normal. I remember that a lot when I was a pastor in a small Highland village. I would go to, there'd be a funeral, there'd be a wake, and you'd go to the house, and for several days, you know, people would come and visit the house, they'd get endless cups of tea and so on. People would sit there without the television on and so on. And invariably, the widow would say something like, oh, it'd be great to get back to normal. This is so surreal. And I always wanted to, in fact, sometimes I did say, I said, look, I'm sorry, but this is the ultimate reality. What you were living before was unreal to some degree. So
Yeah,
going back to watching
that's
your soap operas, having inverted commas, normal life, that's surreal. That's not normal. And so I think Trueman is absolutely spot on. He's got some other great stuff in there as well, hasn't he? Can I read you this bit? Let's see what you think of this. Modern Western cultures tried valiantly to domesticate and marginalize death, both by taming it through fictionalized representations in movies and TV shows, and by keeping the real thing out of sight. But as in the case of that other target of the modern culture of trivialization, sex, we have been mugged by reality. How good is that?
Yeah, that's a great thing. And when you think about the TV shows that deal with death, we get sort of inoculated against it in that sense. But when it actually comes up close to us, we're absolutely horrified by it. So even in the paper, you've got the COVID number of deaths, and Australia is still very ridiculously low, 27 deaths, and quite of older people. But imagine if you had a counter counting in the newspaper every day, how many people died of everything else. Even in this couple of weeks, since COVID, 2 people from my daughter's school, she's finished school a few years, have died in car accidents, one from her year and one from the year below her. So normal deaths, as we would say, just keep ticking on.
Yeah. I looked this up, there are 170,000 deaths per year in Australia. In the United Kingdom, there are 16,000 deaths per day. You know, I remember my sister telling me that in a care home where she worked once, 1 month there were 13 deaths. If that happened now, people would be saying, and they had COVID on it. By the way, are you aware of how difficult it is to report what a death is caused from?
No, tell me why. Why is this so, Dave?
Well, I'm sound so morbid. I've just been reading a lot about this, and this to you this is obvious. To me, it's not. When they record someone died who had COVID, they're not recording that they died because of it. So, for example, I've had a friend whose dad died recently, and it's put down on the death certificate COVID because it's a certifiable disease, whatever. He had COVID, but he'd been seriously ill for a year and was dying anyway. So it's very, very difficult. And I bet you didn't know this, the Australian government has changed the definition 11 times in the past 2 months of what people have died from and so on. But it's
wow.
You know, however we look at it, the fact is 100% of us die, and we can increase or decrease that statistic, as we saw the other day when we were discussing C.S. Lewis. Go on, Steve, cheer us up a wee bit.
And I can't cheer you up. I'd say go and have a party, but there's a proverb in the Bible that says it's better to go to the house of mourning than the house of feasting. In other words, it's better to go to a funeral than a party. And the reason is you learn more at a funeral than you do at a party. I don't think you go to a party to grab your Corona, to grab your beer and learn stuff. You do learn stuff at a funeral, and I've conducted enough funerals, and so have you, to know that people really ask questions at those events, don't they?
Yeah, they do. But you know, there's such a balance in this, because I do think that there are people who can be morbid, and you know, I think we've got to look for hope beyond that. So I'm going to ask you for a Bible verse other than better than to go to a funeral. Give me something that you know, if death is this great enemy, what's the Bible's answer to that?
Well, the Bible's answer to that is the resurrection, the conquering of death by Jesus. And it says this: "A death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting?" And that's a verse from a book in the Bible called 1 Corinthians. And it's talking about the fact that the resurrection of Jesus has been the thing that sort of cut death down and killed death itself. Death doesn't have a future.
Yeah. And I think that the sting of death and the victory of death is sin and judgment and the law, and Christ has taken those things away. So I love, of course, you're not a Lord of the Rings fan, so this really, you're going to struggle with this, aren't you?
Sorry.
At the end of Lord of the Rings, sorry to spoil it, you can go through the 15 hours of film, but at the end of Lord of the Rings, as Frodo and Gandalf, they head into the West. There's a song by Annie Lennox called Into the West, and we played it at a funeral of a dear friend of mine, and it's incredibly moving because the idea is that death is not the end, it's the new beginning. Same in C.S. Lewis's The Last Battle. So for those of us who are Christians, we have that to look forward to. If you're not a Christian, then you just have judgment to look forward to, and that's why you fear death. And I think if you become aware of death, then you become aware that you're mortal. You look to the immortal one to give you eternal life. And that's, in this panic room, that's about the best antidote to panic that you can possibly have.
Oh, well said, Dave. Great way to end the week as well.
Yeah.
The death rate may go up over the weekend from coronavirus, but it certainly is going to continue in everything else. But we've got a hope there. So thanks for ending the week in such a good way, Dave. And we'll see everyone again on Monday.
Yeah, see you on Monday, folks.